Kia ora, and welcome. My name is Clive Young. I'm the Managing Director for William Buck and one of the Business Advisory Directors. We are very pleased to be hosting you today at the special lunch. We intentionally try to keep it small to make it something unique and memorable to you. Most importantly, it gives us a chance to connect and to sit next to you so we can hear about the things that you're doing, your plans for 2018, and maybe some of the things that excite you about your business this year. We promise good food, fine wine, and a good speaker, and maybe some good company, depending on who you're sitting next to. Before introducing Kieran, our keynote speaker, I just want to introduce our director group. So starting on this side, Darren Wright, one of our audit directors. Darren, you want to stand up? Yes. Not everybody knows you, Darren. Okay, and next to him is Praveen Mystery. Praveen is one of our new directors that just joined the director group this year in January. Thank you, Praveen. And then Alison, one of our audit directors, and Michael Wood, another audit director. And then going on this way, we've got Alan Boo. Aaron, stand up, thank you. And two along is Martinez Nord, who is one of our business advisory directors. And one of our other new directors, Jayesh Kumar. Thank you, Jayesh. And last and not least is Cynthia Go, the last of our new directors. Thank you, Cynthia. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, and I jokingly said, when I get nervous, Kieran, I always call you Kieran Reid. And he said, that'll do. But unfortunately, it's Kieran Bird we've got today. But Kieran is our client care and marketing manager at William Buck, and he has recently finished writing a second book called Unshakeable Self-Confidence, Why Organisations Should and How Individuals Can Develop Higher Self-Confidence. Kieran is going to spend 20 minutes talking to us about some concepts in this book as a result of some research that he has done and some techniques to improve your self-confidence. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, and please put your hands together for Kieran Bird.
Thank you, Clyde, and good afternoon, everyone. We promise according to our hopes, and we perform according to our fears. As you can see, that's a quote from 17th century French writer François de la Rochefoucauld, easy for you to say. And I think it's one of the most perceptive statements I've ever heard about human beings, and it really forms the premise for the book. So as Clyde said, we're just going to talk about two parts of the book today. The opening part, which talks about the research that we carried out in 4 countries to ask people how effective they are at work, depending on how self-confident they feel. And the second part, which I cheekily refer to as the slow-release opium diet, is actually 14 techniques. We're leaping to the end of the book. So the book talks about values, fear, weakness and strengths, and systematic desensitization, and then finishes with the happy section. And we're going to take you through the happy section. In the interest of time, because we have lots of lovely food coming, we're just going to look at a 6-pack of facts from each of those sections. So let's get started. As you can see, the survey was done in 2016, 500 plus people each, New Zealand, Australia, the US and the UK. And we asked a series of questions, 15 of them, and as I mentioned, we're looking at 6 of the key findings today. So number 1, my level of self-confidence reduces my ability to contribute to my organisation. Hopefully you can read the slide. I won't talk through all of the details, it just gets a little bit much. I'm just going to cut to the main point, which is that 52% of people say that they are performing according to their fears rather than their hopes, at least sometimes, or always, or usually. That's a big figure. And it raises the question, just how productive are our employees really? And indeed, how much more productive could they be if they spent more time performing according to their hopes rather than their fears? Question 2. If I was more confident, I would contribute more in meetings. Again, cutting to the chase, an astonishing 75% of people admit that is true for them at least some of the time. Now, we use meetings for all kinds of purposes at work. We use them, a lot of innovation comes from meetings, but in particular problem solving. And that does raise the question of just how many problems we're battling to solve because 75% of people keep their mouths shut at least sometimes. Question 3, whoops. I keep quiet about problems at work rather than dealing directly with them. 58% of people say this is true for them at least some of the time. And obviously, problems not stated cannot be repaired, they cannot be fixed. So again, how many individual tiny little bottlenecks exist in our organisations because of this that we cannot see? Question 4. I think this one's fascinating. My ability to concentrate declines when my boss expresses dissatisfaction with me. Again, cutting to the chase, 72% of people say this is true for them at least sometimes. First question for me is, are the bosses aware of this? I suggest no. I suggest that other than that small percentage of genuine bullies, that bosses would not be using the wrong words and wrong tone of voice if they understood the damage it was doing to their employees' ability to concentrate. How important is that? Simple research done in the United States, and I've seen the footage of this, it's absolutely fascinating. You can see it's basically a toddler's jigsaw puzzle. So you've got to match the right size, or right shape with the right hole, and it's timed so it's fun for the kids. But they got adults to do it. And what they found is when the experimenters just quietly praised the adults while doing it, 80% of them beat the 60-second timeline. But when being quietly criticised, only 20% could beat the timeline. That's a massive difference and suggests how big an issue this really is. And it leads to the question, how much of the time are our employees left feeling and performing like this image? Question 5, I feel comfortable bringing my whole self to work. If you're not familiar with that phrase, it comes from the diversity movement. And what it means is, let me give you an example. Let's say I work with Michael and there's a lot of other guys who look a bit like us, a bunch of middle-aged Pakeha men running this company. That means we bring with us a certain worldview. And if we decide one day our next hire is a young Muslim woman from Indonesia, she brings with her an entirely different worldview. And that challenges our groupthink. It challenges the assumptions we make about life, but only if we make her feel comfortable being Muslim, being Indonesian at work. Does that make sense? So let's have a look at the result. 29% of people say that they only feel comfortable being themselves at work some of the time, which means there's a loss to the advantage of diversity. What is that advantage? In case you haven't seen these stats the last few years, as you can see, the McKinsey study says gender diverse companies 15% more likely to outperform their competitors financially, and ethnically diverse companies an astonishing 35% more likely to financially outperform the competition, which to me suggests that an approach on self-confidence as well as diversity would also make sense. Question 6, and this is a very stark finding. I negotiate deals where I could get a better deal if I was more confident. I should point out that everybody who filled out the survey was 18 to 65 years of age and working, but the people who answered this question either sold or bought on behalf of their companies. In other words, they're professional negotiators. And this is, to me, shocking. 63% of people say they could get better deals if they are more confident. And these are the people doing the negotiation. There's a couple of questions around this. One is, what is the financial cost? We can't work that out from this survey, but it's clearly massive. And the other side is it real or is it just their perception? Well, luckily for us, research has been done on this subject. Now, Huthwaite are not as well known as McKinsey, but in the world of sales, they are arguably the most respected research organisation in the world. And you can see what they found. 20% of the time is how often underconfident negotiators will succeed. This suggests that self-confidence training should be a big part of sales and purchasing training. All of this added up together leads me to feel very confident to quote Dr. Johnson to say that self-confidence is the first requisite to great undertakings, not just for individuals, which we understand, but also for organisations. So that's the thought-provoking stuff. That's the, gosh, there's more going on than we realised in our workers' minds. Now let's jump to the end of the book where we look at what one of the things that we can help other people as well as ourselves do to just feel good every day. To quote Ralph Waldo Emerson, to write it on our hearts that every day is the best day of the year. There's 14 tips in the book. We're just going to cut to the six-pack, the 6 that are most newsy, if you like. First of all, why do I obnoxiously refer to this as the slow-release opium diet? Well, as you're probably aware, pleasure, any kind of pleasure that we feel, is mainly dopamine being released in the brain. And drugs like heroin and opium produce an enormous amount of dopamine, make you feel very good, and then of course feel very bad afterwards. But even if it's chocolate, whatever it is that gives pleasure, that's dopamine being produced in the brain. But we know for sure now that there are a number of techniques that we can use to continuously keep the brain producing higher dopamine than normal, but not at an unsustainable, i.e. addicting level. So, point 1 is exercise. Oh, right, this is obvious, isn't it? But I'm not going to tell you the obvious, that exercise is good for you, etc. I'm going to give you 2 pieces of, hopefully, news. The first is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. All this means is the work that we do, the activity we undertake when we're not actually exercising. So walking around the office, for example. And the exciting part is you can see at the top, for the average person, about 12 to 13% of their calories are burned through going to the gym or running. And about twice as many are burned through NEAT. That's why there's a big trend now towards standing desks. If you simply have a standing meeting rather than sit, you're burning extra calories. If you take the stairs rather than take the lift, you're burning extra calories. And you might have a colleague who you find slightly distracting because they fidget all the time. Guess what? They've got the advantage. They're burning calories all the time. Isn't that good news? But I think the second part is even more interesting. Dr. Michael Mosley is a British-based GP, and he's made a series of fascinating documentaries. In fact, 4 of the 14 points I was taught by Dr. Michael Mosley's documentaries. Fast exercise, he set up various websites to help around this, is technically referred to as high-intensity interval training. The researchers at Loughborough University, interestingly, it comes from the UK, not the US, they found that they've been researching intense training, high intensity, and they've been shrinking down the amount of time spent to work out where it still has positive benefit. This might surprise you. So here's a classic high intensity interval training workout. Cycle or run or row, anything you can do with 100% intensity for 20 seconds, rest, 20 seconds, rest, 20 seconds. Even the non-accountants in the room know that's only a minute. And how often does it have to be done per week? They've squeezed it down to 3 times a week. We are literally talking 3 minutes of exercise a week. Now come on, that can't have many benefits, can it? Well, let's look. Better calorie loss, better fat loss, better visceral fat loss. That's the fat that hangs around the stomach and is very dangerous. Better oxygen consumption, better blood pressure, better blood sugar, and 50 studies show improved insulin resistance. And I love the last stat because it's back to back and it's very stark. 2 minutes of sprinting, not walking, not running, but 2 minutes of sprinting increased metabolism over 24 hours as much as 30 minutes of running, not walking or jogging. That's how effective high intensity training is. And they made the point on the documentary that now there's no more excuses for people who say they're too busy, because you can just jog, or you can run flat out, I shouldn't say jog, run flat out for 20 seconds, do it 3 times, still get to the boardroom without sweating. Isn't that great news? Next point, eat well. Well, we're going to do that shortly. We know that already. But I'm not going to give you a lot of boring stuff about eating lots of colours and down the food chain. Instead, I'm going to give you the great news about intermittent fasting. And the researchers involved in this have now come up with a statement that there is very clearly nothing that you can do better for your body than intermittent fasting. It slows aging. Some of the specifics are 6.5 kilograms in 3 months, and it tends to stay off, unlike with traditional dieting. This one study of 115 overweight participants, as you can see, more fat loss and lower risk of breast cancer, and that's not easy to achieve. And finally, and I think stunningly, delays dementia. The trials on humans are already underway, and I'll honestly be very surprised if they don't find that's true for humans as well. 5 plus 2 means simply this: 5 days a week, you do what you ordinarily do. Eat nice lunches with William Buck or whatever you ordinarily do, and only 2 days a week do you need to think about your diet. For men, if you restrict your calorie intake to around 600 calories, for women to around 500 calories, these are the benefits that you can get. And there's no planning about food, no messing around on what you have to eat. Just 2 days a week, you restrict your diet, and delaying dementia's got to be good, right? Next point. First of all, you don't have to be a politician to want to kiss that baby, do you? How gorgeous is she? Get adequate rest. I know this is obvious, but just 4 quick points here. The first one is caffeine. We all know we shouldn't have a lot of caffeine if we want to get to sleep, but I've got a friend who told me years ago, I don't understand why I can't sleep. I don't drink coffee after midday, except the studies show that caffeine stays in the system for some people for up to 50 hours. That's 2 days. So for some people, no caffeine is the only way they'll get good sleep. 2 more interesting points. One is 10 minutes of sunshine a day. That helps us produce melatonin. Melatonin sets us off to sleep. And for those of us who always avoid sunshine, it's actually not a good idea. And conversely, the smartphone, the laptop, the TV, that emits blue light. And blue light stops your body emitting melatonin. So if you're looking at your screen, whatever screen it is, for the last couple of hours of the night, that could explain why it's hard to get to sleep. But the great news is you don't have to switch off your laptop. All you have to do, silly as it sounds, it's true, just a pair of light brown tinted sunglasses, and that completely reverses that effect. The 4th point is the obvious one: exercise enough and you'll sleep. I am responsible. Now what am I talking about? Brian Tracy, some of you may have heard that name. He's a Canadian-American business guru, and I've been following him for years. And years ago, I learned this advice, that when facing a tough situation, when facing a crisis, to tell myself, I am responsible. And I completely avoided it, I must say, because it sounded to me like at a bad time I was going to beat myself up, and I didn't fancy that. Except a few years ago, I found myself sitting at LAX airport, and I was extremely upset. I was extremely angry. I was feeling very, very sorry for myself, it's fair to say, to the point where I was nearly in tears in a public place, and I didn't fancy doing that. And I remembered this advice, so I started saying silent to myself, I am responsible. I am responsible. And the effect was absolutely startling and almost immediately. I went from being whiny and negative and just hating, wanting to blame the world, to calm and confident that I could deal with it. Of course I could deal with it. Humans are resilient. But what I instinctively realised how foolish I had been to ignore this advice for years, because simply what I was doing, one harsh leap from whiny, blamey, childlike mode into calm, adult mode. It works way better than you could imagine. Next time you find yourself in a crisis, try saying it. And I should point out, was I 100% responsible for that situation? No, in fact, I believe I can fairly blame most of the responsibility on someone else. But notice the word I'm using, blame. And as Brian Tracy says, blame looks backwards, responsibility looks forwards. So it doesn't matter how much anyone else was responsible, you take responsibility moving forward and you'll automatically feel better and be able to deal with it. Cognitive bias modification. If you've not heard of this tool, I'm really pleased to be able to bring you this news. As you probably know, right in the middle of the brain there's a small centre called the amygdala, the fear centre. And it's great because if you and I are standing outside in the street having a chat and we hear a truck accelerating towards us, for a second we're going to stop concentrating on each other, look at the truck and make sure we stay alive and safe. That's what the amygdala does for us. But it also means that human beings have the potential to become slightly negative, to be focused and biased towards pessimism, because our brains are constantly hunting for danger. And now we've got a very, very good solution. So first of all, I'll tell you about the benefits again. A good friend of mine, American friend of mine, has suffered from social anxiety disorder for years, and it just plays havoc with his life. He's tried all kinds of things before this and they didn't work. That is an amazing finding. 72%. Just 7 days, which is not what they recommend. They recommend you do it for a good 6 weeks. Just 7 days made people feel better, genuinely depressed patients. And finally, 12 studies in 2010, as you can see, found out it was absolutely effective for dealing with anxiety, leading a no less august publication than The Economist to state this. It's very strong stuff, isn't it? Especially coming from the very sober Economist. So this has got to be expensive or hard to do, right, to get all that benefit? No. This is the game. See the gentleman at the bottom left there? He's happy, so you click on his face. As soon as you click on his face, you get a score and it changes. And you keep hunting as fast as you can for the happiest face. And you build up a score, and you go on to want to play it again to beat your score and beat your score. And by hunting constantly for the most positive sign, you are literally creating new neural pathways in your brain. And after 6 weeks, people have been found to be much more positive by using this. Give it to your mates, give it to your employees, give it to kids to use. It is a real breakthrough tool. Costs about $5, and it's just a game. It's fantastic. Visualize success. We know that all top performers in business, but also in the arts and sports and so on around the world, use visualization as part of how they create a successful life. And we've learned a lot over the last few decades of just how effective this really is. And one of the stories that alerted psychologists to this was the story of Captain Jack Sands. He was a US Navy pilot during the Vietnam War, and he was shot down. And he spent 7 years in the Hanoi Hilton. I'm sure you don't need me to explain much about that. 5 foot by 5 foot cell and 7 years of brutality. In an attempt to stay sane under that kind of pressure, Captain Sands, who loved golf, created in his mind an 18-hole golf course. He knew the bunkers, the trees. Every day he felt where the wind was coming from. And every day, bearing in mind the man couldn't stand up, he played 18 holes of golf in his mind. Straight after the war, when American military psychologists examined him, they found that he was one of the most psychologically healthy subjects they had found. And he found, when he had his first game of golf, that although he averaged 100 shots per game before the Vietnam War, his first game was 72 shots. We now know from all the research that's been done since that if we imagine anything with great detail and great imagination, we really believe it, our brains accept it as true and make the appropriate changes. Visualization is enormously powerful. So, to sum up, I won't mention the 6 we've already talked about. I'll just run through the others. Meditate. You don't need me to tell you about it. I'm not an expert, but it does so much good. If you've never tried it, you really should. Make daily positive affirmations. A little bit controversial, this, a bit of American style, but lots of research shows that people who encourage themselves by saying, I can do this, I love my job, whatever it might be, perform better. Spend time with positive people. So many people have somebody who is constant negative drag on their lives, constantly complaining and whining. My suggestion to anyone I coach around this is, unless that person's your kids, get them out of your life, if you can. Keep a gratitude journal. That is very similar to playing Anxiety Mint. Sorry, they recently changed the name. That is, again, it retrains our brain away from being biased towards the negative. Read or listen to positive motivational material. If I could do only one of these 14 things, for me, it would be that. Work your goals daily. There's a cheesy saying from the US, if you're feeling listless, make a list. When we make a list to do, we feel excited, we work our goals, we always feel positive. Feel good about the way you look. We get better treated when we look better, and just looking as good as you can when you go out to work is an easy win. Finally, and here's the conclusion from the book, that the glue that holds it all together does require self-discipline. That is the book, little plug there, little self-promotion, and we're all waiting to eat, so I won't stand up here for questions, but if you've got any questions, love to talk to you about it, and thank you very much indeed for your time and attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Karen. I'm sure all of us at some stage will come across a lot of that information, but just getting it re-put in front of us and confronting us with it, Karen, is very, very valuable. So if you put your hands together again, Karen, good. So lunch is just about being served, so you are allowed to talk to the person next to you until thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm getting